I never seen such desolation. I think we drove for a mile and there wasn't a building hardly standing.
Nobody knew what was going on. They called the situation fluid, but fluid means that nobody knew anything.
It was different. If I had done something else, I don't know what I would have done.
We're talking today with Mr. Tanjore Splan of Greenville, Michigan. The interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Mr. Splan, can you start by giving us a little bit of background on yourself? Where and when were you born, for instance?
I was born...
Can you speak up a little bit, please?
I was born in September of 1929 at St. Ignace, Michigan. And when I was 4 years old, I was placed in a children's home, and I grew up there until I was 11. Then I went to work on a farm. But to me, other children, we were going out to work.
Mm-hmm.
No one ever talked about foster children in those days, to me anyway.
Yeah. And did you go to school at this time, or?
Yeah, I went to. I had been going to junior high school at Sault Ste. Marie, and I went out to work on a farm and went to school at Pickford High School. I stayed there for a couple of years, and then I quit school because I didn't feel like I could take part in things that everybody else did.
Now, at this time, were you living on the farm where you were working?
Yes.
Okay. And was this just somebody who hired you out of the children's home? Or
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you didn't really know much about where your relatives were or anything like that?
Oh, I did. I knew my mother visited me a couple of times there at the children's home. I had frequent contact with my father. And then, anyway, after I quit school, I shipped on the Great Lakes on the ore freighters as a coal passer, and then I went to work on the ferry at St. Ignace to Mackinac Island. I was a fireman there.
How old were you at this time?
I was 16 when I was a fireman there.
All right.
And when the tourist business shut down pretty much around Labor Day, and the ferry stopped running, is right when I turned 17, so I joined the Army. It was a place to go to work.
Okay. What motivated you to join the Army?
Well, it was the thing that I needed a job, a place to go. So I quit school, and then of course everyone was the Army was saying they had won the war and they had to win the peace, so they needed a standing army, and. Looking at everybody that I knew, who had been in service and so on, I really felt like it was a duty to go.
Now, had you paid much attention to the news from the war while it was going on?
Oh yes, I sent away, I think, and got a book identifying airplanes, and I went out and volunteered to be a spotter. Nothing ever developed of that.
No. In the Sault Ste. Marie area, were they worried about sabotage in the locks or things like that? Was there security around?
Oh yes, it was in the area of 125 to 150 barrage balloons that were put up whenever the weather was clear enough, because I remember that 5 of them were hit by lightning one night and burned, and there were about 12,000 troops moved into the Sioux. They lived in pyramid tents in the woods out behind the children's home there. They had fog machines set up around the locks to cover it kind of from aircraft. I don't know.
Don't know that anybody, the Japanese or the Germans, had any aircraft that would make it out there, but I guess
Yeah,
that was
it's,
part of the
looking
precaution.
back on it, I wonder what it was all about. Yeah.
So there was a fair amount sort of military activity kind of going on around you as you were growing up and you were starting to work
Yeah.
and all of this kind of thing.
Yeah.
All right. Now, up in that area then, job opportunities were probably pretty limited. There wasn't a whole lot
There were.
going on.
Yeah. The tourist business was, for a young kid anyway, it was kind of like 25 cents an hour and all the carrots you can eat or something. But when I was, in the area of 8, 9 years old, I recall, there was Fort Bragg at the Sioux. And they used to have troops go marching by even before the war. But they used to also come out on with big old trucks with the solid rubber tires, towing little 35 millimeter anti-tank guns, and they would go out. The city limits was just out past the children's home, and they'd set up a road, excuse me, a roadblock out there, and later, when I joined the Army, I had the choice, joining for 3 years, I had a choice of going to various branches of the Army, and I decided field artillery might be a good place to go. At least I'd get a ride. So I remember doing a lot of that then in the first 3 years I was in the Army, where you set up a roadblock, you run out and drop the howitzer and spread the trails and set up like you're ready to fire, and same stuff I'd watched people do before.
All right. Now, once you decided to enlist, now, did you have to have somebody sign for you since you were 17? Did you have to get someone's permission?
Yes, my mother was living in Detroit. I went down to Detroit, and she signed for me to enlist.
All right. Now, once you enlisted, where then did you report for service?
I went, was sworn in at Detroit and put on a train the same day to Fort Sheridan, Illinois, and went through the induction thing there for 3 days, I believe, and then we loaded on a train and made a 5-day trip to North Carolina. The train was way down on the priority list.
I guess so.
It went down into northern Florida, I think, and then back up to North Carolina.
So where did you go in North Carolina? Where were you going to be based?
At Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I took my basic training there, and I took a field artillery basic training.
All right. Now, what did your basic training consist of? What did they have you do when you got there?
Well, we learned the things of military courtesy, plus the marching and weapons, small weapons, and but of course it was field artillery basic, so we spent a lot of time on 105 howitzers, and ended up after 16 weeks of basic training, we finally at the end of it began firing the 105 howitzers.
Okay. Now, did you get a lot of physical training in basic? Did you have to march around a lot and camp and all of that kind of thing?
I did a lot of that, and the daily things in a sand pit of throwing a log between two teams, like of maybe 10 men, lie on your back while the other team holds your feet, and you do sit-ups with a log on your chest, and hopefully everybody does their part, otherwise you're carrying somebody along with a log.
And what kind of people were you in with? Were they just people from all over the place who signed up for different reasons, or?
Yeah, they were, I think for the most part in basic they were from east of the Mississippi River. I don't think it was anyone from the west there.
Okay.
At least 3/4 of them were drafted.
Okay, so there's still a fairly substantial draft, even though the war itself is over, and they'd had
The draft
a
was
lot
still
of extra
going on,
soldiers
yes.
that they were mustering out at that time.
Yeah.
All right. Now, were you in pretty good physical shape at this point? You'd done farm work and
Oh, yeah.
shoveling coal and all of this kind of thing.
Yes, it was.
Did you have any problems adjusting to military life, or was it a fairly natural transition for you?
Well, I didn't have a lot of problems except, some things I considered unfair, and I was a little bit resistant to that. But that they would punish the whole outfit because somebody did something wrong. It just didn't impress me.
All right. Now, what kind of duty were you actually trained for? I mean, if you're training for the artillery, do you have a specific assignment, as a loader or something else, or you do train for several different things?
Well, the training then was to rotate, and you learn all of the positions on the 105 howitzer.
Now, would that include calculating ranges and things like that, as well as?
No, you get those from a fire direction center, and you just set them on the gun sights and fire it. It's all to do with just firing the weapon. Fire direction center was an advanced training to get there.
Okay. Now the 16 weeks, did that include both standard basic training and the artillery basic training after it? Did you do both in those 16 weeks?
It was all together.
Okay. All right, and then once you completed that training, then what did you do?
I went to, during that training, I saw the films on Airborne, and kind of a recruiting deal to get people to join the Airborne, and I joined for the $50 extra a month, and so I went to the 82nd Airborne Division, which is also at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And when I had been there in the division about 3-4 months, I was sent to the Field Artillery School at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, for some advanced training in mechanics of field artillery.
Right. Now, while you were training with the 82nd there at Fort Bragg, did you get as far as jump training, or was it just stuff that was preparatory to that?
I didn't get to the jump training until I completed the field artillery mechanics thing at Fort Sill, Oklahoma.
Okay. Well, then tell us a little bit about that. First of all, what kind of place was Fort Sill compared to Fort Bragg? Were they pretty much the same sort of place, or was it a different?
No, well, for the physical layout is a lot the same, but there I went to class every day, and pretty much out of a book, training films, lectures, and then actually working on weapons from 45 caliber pistol up to 8-inch howitzers, learning something about all of them, and how to do the maintenance for a battery-sized unit.
Would the maintenance be just for the guns themselves, or would that include the transport and the rest of it as well?
The transport?
The trucks and...
No, we didn't. We didn't do anything with trucks. It was pretty much on the weapon.
Right. Okay. And then how long did you spend doing that?
6 months.
Okay. Now, was there anything else to do while you were out at Fort Sill? I mean, by this time here and there, you'd probably get liberty, or you could go off base.
Oh yeah. So that's one of the good things about Army is that whenever you're not on actual duty, you're free to go. So you're you could have what the Navy called liberty every night, until reveille in the morning. So.
Was there much to do outside of Fort Sill?
I don't know. I guess I stayed busy with looking around here and there, and of course always dating girls, but I don't recall any specific thing that I had any interest in out there.
All right. So you finish that, you take your training there, then you go back to Fort Bragg again at that point?
Yes.
Okay. Then what are you learning then once you get back to Fort Bragg?
Going through constant training. Like, there between World War II and the Korean War, the 82nd Airborne and the 1st Marine Division, I think, were the only two combat-ready divisions. And so we were training all the time to, get up to that speed. And then, because I was back in the unit, I guess, about 3 months before I finally got to go to jump school. So I was in the Airborne there for 10 months before I went to jump school.
All right. Now, were artillerists expected to be able to parachute, or?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So then, did you get that far and actually start jumping out of airplanes?
Yes, you do that in jump school. When I went to jump school, they had just started the new program. I got a lot of those new program deals. We had, instead of the 5 weeks of training that had been before, I had 6 weeks, which included 1 week of glider training and 2 glider rides. And instead of 5 parachute jumps in school, you did 6, one of them being a night jump.
So can you describe the experience of taking a jump for the first time?
Well, I remember I was number 7 in the lineup, and I had never been up. I'd never been up in an airplane before. I was a little concerned about stepping into the doorway and standing there, so I traded with a friend for him to be number 7 and me to be for him to take my number 1 place and let me take his number 7 spot. Or 8, because anyway, when we got in the plane, they broke it up into 7-man sticks. So the first time the plane passed over the drop zone, they dropped 7 men.
Right.
So that made me number 1 man in the second stick. So I stood in the door, and then if there was any vehicle moving on the field, they stopped jumping until the vehicle stopped. And so an ambulance went on the field. So I stood in the door while they made a complete circle, and it didn't bother me at all. I was really impressed with looking out there. And so anyway, then after I jumped and my chute opened, for that few seconds till you get on the ground, it's just very exhilarating. And the weather being good that day, when I landed, I was ready to go again right now. That was certainly as good as any carnival ride.
All right. Now, what was it like landing in a glider?
It was just a nice ride. I recall that we were in a double tow, and I was sitting at the back of the glider, where I could look out the window on the door, and I was looking out at the glider next to us, which was slightly ahead, and I looked, something drew my attention inside the glider, and when I looked back, he was gone, and I looked out, and he was diving straight down, and it was the thing where the pilots would dive the thing and pick up airspeed, and they were very good at bringing the plane back down on the field right up to the point where we could get out of the thing and a new load of people would go in for their glider ride.
When you saw the thing heading straight down, did you begin to worry what was going to happen to it?
Well, I was. That you know, I never imagined they would put the thing into a dive like that.
Okay. And then when they launched you, did you also go into a dive like that?
Yes.
All right. Now, were you strapped into the plane or whatever? I mean, if it's heading down, would you
Yeah,
all...
you're wearing a seatbelt. Yeah.
All right. And did he make a soft landing?
Oh yeah, it was fine. You know.
Because back in World War II, the glider service was pretty dangerous, and there were a lot of crashes when they landed, and
Oh yeah.
a lot of casualties that way.
Yeah, it's only in the last few years that I realized that they were, in the first place, they weren't volunteers to begin with.
That's true.
Then they didn't draw extra pay for doing it, and their losses were higher than parachutists. Yeah, I don't think they got a fair shake out of that.
All right. So once you complete this training now, do you stay in the 82nd for the rest of
Yes.
that first time in the service?
Yes, I did.
And were you ever deployed anyplace else, or did you just stay at Fort Bragg?
I stayed at Fort Bragg, although the division used to, units out of the division used to travel around to parade every 4th of July, Memorial Days. I was at a demonstration at Washington, D.C. for President Truman's inauguration in 1948. I attended General Pershing's funeral in Washington, D.C., out to Arlington Cemetery. And we paraded at Knoxville and a number of other cities.
Now, was your artillery unit expected to, would they land, in principle, if they were to deploy that unit, was the idea that you would land the artillery pieces in gliders, or that they would be towed in from someplace, or?
Well, in the parachutists, we used 75 pack howitzers,
Right.
which were dropped in bundles, 7 bundles, and put the howitzer together and use that. Although almost all of our training was on 105 howitzers. We did some on the 75, and when we jumped with the 75. They also had the M3 105 howitzer, which has a shorter tube, and it would fire only 5 charges instead of 7, and that could be taken in the glider. So that was the 105 that we used all the time there. In 1948, late 1948, they began experimenting with the dropping the 105 howitzer from a C-82 airplane.
Okay,
And
what was a C-82? Was it just a transport plane, or?
That was the plane they were using for jumping down. It was the thing with the twin fuselage and kind of a big belly thing in the middle with clamshell doors at the back. And they took these clamshell doors off so that the howitzer could be drawn out with a drag chute and dropped. But I was on the field and watched them drop and land, but I never had an exercise where we were using the 105s that had been dropped.
All right. Now, you signed up for a 3-year hitch initially when you enlisted, and that gets you to 1949. Now, at that point then, you did not immediately re-enlist.
No.
So what was going on there?
I went back and finished a year of high school. And when I got out of school in May, when I graduated, I made up the 2 years of high school I was missing in the 1 year.
Right.
And in May, when I graduated, I moved down to Detroit and went to work for the Bud Corporation, making wheels for Chrysler products. And at the same time, I worked for General Motors Cadillac Division. And my intention was to work 2 jobs at once and accumulate some money with a plan to start school in September at Milwaukee, University of Milwaukee. And I never got that far. The Korean War started, and so I re-enlisted. I thought it was the beginning of World War III, and I always kicked myself for that. But a few years ago, I went back and reviewed the Life magazines from that period, and I think it was about November of 1950. There was an article there that said that at that point, 67% of Americans believed that was going to be the beginning of World War III.
Well,
So,
if General MacArthur had gotten his way, we might have gotten that far. But,
you know,
that didn't quite happen that way. So basically, though, this was something where, while it was a crisis in some far-off corner of Asia that maybe you'd never heard of, there was the idea that it was part of something bigger. And this was
Yes.
us against the communists at that point. And China had just had its revolution and so forth, and so it was not clear what was going to happen next. All right. So you re-enlist. All right. And at that point, where do you go? What do you do?
I went to the induction center at Fort Knox, Kentucky, and I spent a few weeks there, maybe a couple of weeks, because I joined my unit in Korea in 41 days after I re-enlisted. I think I was at Fort Knox for a week or less, went on leave for 10 days about, and then got a train then out to Seattle, and we were there for about 3 days. I turned 21 when I was at Pier 91 in Seattle waiting to go.
Now, at that point, were you assigned to a unit, or were you just an individual heading over for who knows what?
Yeah, just one of a bunch.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you ship out, they send you out as far as Seattle, and then what happens from there?
We were loaded on airplanes, well, we were loaded on trucks, taken to an airport, and they said Vancouver, and I never found out whether it was Vancouver, British Columbia, or Vancouver in Washington. But Vancouver in Washington was small, and so I assume we went to Canada, but I'm not sure about it. They kept it a secret from us. I think everybody else knew what's going on but us. They had to pull the curtain down on the back of the 2.5-ton truck that we were riding in, so you couldn't see anything. You don't know where we were. We loaded on a commercial airline and flew to Anchorage, Alaska, and we were there for a couple of hours. And then from there to Shimiya Air Base in the Aleutians, and we were there about 5 hours, and then from there to Tokyo. And then I spent 4 days in Tokyo.
When did you actually arrive in Tokyo? Around what date was that?
It would have been, I guess, about the 10th of September. And we were issued field equipment and a rifle. We went out to our range and fired 4 rounds of ammunition, and that was it. Whether the thing was shooting right or not, whether you could hit anything or not, we never got into that.
Now, were the men you were with, were these mostly people who had been in the Army for a while? Were they new recruits, or?
Mostly they were new, reasonably fresh out of basic training.
Okay.
And,
so you were the old guy at that point?
Yeah, kind of. Although I didn't get to know these people well, I was only with them for a few days, and it was a thing when I joined my unit. The men there were, a lot of them had been with the unit for at least a year and had done some artillery training. I don't know how extensive it was, but I know that I don't think anyone at that point that I was with had field artillery basic training. The Army had changed right after I had my training, and they gave everyone, and still do, I guess, everyone gets infantry basic training. Then they go to advanced training from there. And so a lot of these people knew nothing about field artillery that were in it.
Okay. Now, at this point now, are you assigned to a unit?
Pardon?
Are you assigned to a unit at this time?
Yes.
Okay, and what was the unit that you joined?
I was with C Battery of the 555 Field Artillery, which is part of the 5th Regimental Combat Team.
Right, and that was essentially an independent unit. It wasn't part
Yes.
of the division? Okay. So you're with them. Then how long do you spend in Japan with them before you go over to Korea?
Oh, I didn't stay in Japan. I was only there for 4 days.
Okay.
Loaded on a ship, and I joined the 5th when I was in Korea.
Okay, so you got to Korea. They were already there.
Yes.
All right. So sort of the middle of September now in 1950. At this point, the North Koreans had invaded a couple of months earlier. They had pushed most of the way down through South Korea, and the Americans and South Koreans were defending at that point the Pusan perimeter. Now, at the point when you joined, had that part of the fight basically ended? Had the Koreans stopped attacking by the time you got there, or was the fighting still going on?
Oh, it was still going on. That's it was the question in our minds that whether or not we were going to hold out. And of course, we didn't know that at the same time, when I was joining my unit, the Marines were landing at Incheon.
Right.
And it was from there was an immediate relief. And we broke out of the Pusan perimeter.
Okay. Now, describe a little bit sort of what you remember about actually arriving at the unit and joining it, and then what you're doing when you're first there. Were they up in the line someplace, or were they back at Pusan? Or
No, they were up on the line. We're firing daily, getting some return fire, not a lot, and I don't know what to describe of it.
Well, you're talking a little bit about the men in the unit. So the unit had already been in action for a while. So there were people, maybe they didn't have artillery training, but by now they had some experience?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. And then did you fit in fairly well with them once you got there?
Yeah, I think so. I had gotten, I was fine going into any position on the gun. And at first I was just assigned as one of the loading cannoneers.
Right.
So.
Did you get to actually use any of the training you'd had in maintenance and repair and that kind of thing?
No, not. For my own weapon, I knew how the thing functions and everything, and I could take any small arms and work on it, but I wasn't assigned to do anything like that.
Okay. Now, about how long did you stay in place there at Pusan before you started to move forward?
Well, we went by train from Pusan up to Daegu, and there I was with in a replacement center, and that was like the same day that we landed at Pusan. We went up to Daegu,
right.
And about 4 or 5 days after that, we broke out of the Pusan perimeter and began the pursuit across the peninsula.
All right. Now, what impression did you have of Korea itself when you got there? What did it look like? What were you seeing of the place or the people themselves?
It was disappointing, dirty, smelled terrible. Just all of the smells. I recall being on the truck, and a man went by, walking by the truck, and he had a big flat cardboard or something on his head with fish laying out on top of it. The flies were thick on it, and it smelled like they'd caught the fish 3 days before or something. I don't know what he was going to do with them.
All right. Now, then when you make the break out there, you're going across the country, did you see much of anything of the North Koreans at all, or were you just crossing open country?
No, we didn't see much of them. We, well, a couple of places we were set up like in a roadblock, and refugees were pouring through our position, and some people were taken out of that group of people as North Koreans. That was done mostly by South Korean people who were assigned to our unit.
And what impression did you have of the South Koreans, at least the ones that were assigned to your unit? Were they military people, or were they civilian officials? Or?
Didn't have a lot of contact with them, and there was one fellow who, I don't recall, I guess I was on an outpost with him at one point, and I learned that he was a police officer from Seoul, and but the rest of them were just young guys who had, not just come off the farm,
Right.
No training.
But they were soldiers at that point?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Now you move forward. Does your unit go up to Seoul, or do you go someplace else?
We went kind of diagonally across the peninsula to Seoul, and then straight up from Seoul to Pyongyang, the North Korean capital.
All right. Now, once you got to Pyongyang, did you have the expectation that the war was going to be over, or things were pretty much done?
Well, that's where it was up in the air. We thought it was about over with. That when we reached the Yalu River, then that would be it. And the North Koreans were putting up very little resistance at that point.
Okay. Now, at what point do you begin to realize things aren't going to be quite so easy?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess one morning I had a Chinese sitting on the hood of a Jeep, and they're talking about the Chinese being into it. Of course, at that point, MacArthur and his intelligence people were still saying that the Chinese weren't involved in it, but it looked like this is going to be more than just going to the Yalu River.
All right. Now, how far up into North Korea did you get?
We were, I think, about 17 miles from the Yalu River.
All right. And if we're kind of going sort of west, east, across the peninsula there, were you closer to the western end and the Chinese end, or the other side?
We were closer to the western end, yes.
Okay. Now, once the Chinese start the counterattack and they start pushing back, did your unit sort of engage them where it was, or did you pull back, or what happened then?
Well, we pulled back and pretty closely retraced the road we had going up until we were maybe halfway between, well, no, we were just probably a little bit south of Pyongyang when we turned east, and from there on we're going southeast. Actually, we didn't get too far into the peninsula, though, because when we got down to the 38th parallel, we ended up going back through Seoul on the way back.
Now, as you're moving around, were there phases where you would stop and fire the guns, or were you just mostly moving?
Oh no, we were firing almost, constantly from you go one position to another. I think hardly a day passed you weren't firing a lot.
Right. And were there refugees around you, people moving south, or retreating units, or anything else like that?
Well, when we started down, there were no people around. They were all south of us.
Right.
I don't recall them being on the roads again until we were down maybe 75 miles south of Seoul, where we spent the winter, kind of spent a month or two. And at that point, there were hundreds of South Koreans walking on the road, presumably South Koreans, but it could have been anybody.
Or just any Koreans who didn't want to be under the North Koreans.
Right.
But now, where did you stop then? What was your position where you stopped retreating?
I think that was about 75 miles south, south and a little bit east of Seoul.
Okay. And when you got there, then was the infantry from your regiment kind of part of a front line, or were you a reserve unit, or?
The infantry was still on line, and at first, I guess the Chinese had not really kept up with us, so we weren't firing or anything. That was into January, and it was extremely cold, so it would have been difficult for them too. So I guess that's why they didn't keep up with us.
Okay. At that point, what were you sleeping in tents or on the ground, or what kind of thing did you have?
You try to dig a hole, and for the most part, we would get rice straw and put it in the bottom of the hole, and then put your sleeping bag into it and cover it with straw, and then crawl down into it. I think about the 10th of January, I got a down sleeping bag, and about 10 days later, we had some kind of a jury rig stove, about as big as a 30-gallon drum, and we had it in a little pit-like. I fell asleep around 4 o'clock in the morning. I woke up and it had burnt a hole about as big as $50 in my sleeping bag, and heated my feet up. But from there on, I was freezing my feet every night because feathers kept leaking out of that hole. I couldn't do anything with it.
You couldn't sew it up or patch it or something?
You had nothing to patch it with.
Okay. Now, were there a lot of problems with frostbite and things like that during that winter?
There were, not with us so much, because field artillery, we had, you had enough cover so that you could keep your socks changed and so on.
Right.
And it was, I don't know, I hate to put it on anyone, but I thought, mainly neglect on the part of the individual. There were times when you're, stuck out someplace and your feet might really freeze all the way. I don't know, when we were moving down there, we sometimes would drive for a period, and you're riding on top of the truck. You can't do anything to keep warm. And they would stop, and we'd bail out of there and run out in the field, and they had the rice was done up in sheaves, and then the sheaves then were stacked in what we call a shock, and they would start at one end and light it and move along with it, eat the puffed rice as you go, and try to get your feet warm. And I remember one time when I guess I slept through one of those, so my feet were just absolutely numb. When I woke up, the guys were already out in the field, and had the rice burning, and I jumped off the truck, and I couldn't walk because my feet were so numb. And when I finally got out there, I just got out there, and they said, load up. Everybody running back to the truck, and I got into the fire and stomped around in it for a couple of minutes, and I got enough heat so that my feet began to really hurt. But,
So basically your unit has gone down, so you've made it to January of 51, you've stopped retreating, you're in line, the Chinese are catching up with you. Now, eventually then, do you start attacking them, or do they come after you, or what goes on next?
we began moving up, and it was mostly moving up, maybe a little bit of retreat, and then move up again, and that went on until April. And then in April, the end of April, Chinese began a really big spring push. And our unit was hit bad.
Now, did your artillery unit come under fire? Did the Chinese have artillery of their own they were using, or was it mostly the infantry that was getting hit?
We did in some places, but for the most part it was, I think, the mortar. But when in the spring there, during that retreat in late April, we were ambushed on the road, and that one the night before, well, the day before, they said that the spring push had started, and that they had expected, and the South Koreans on our right flank had withdrawn about 5 miles. And so in the morning we moved back to stabilize the line again. Well, by afternoon they said they had withdrawn another 11 miles. So we moved back to stabilize the line again, but they were not there either. And so around 7 in the evening, I remember we were watching them on the ridge line, right parallel to the road, across the road from us, walking right along the ridge line. Hundreds of them going by us. And they said it was South Koreans, but we didn't think that was likely because they said before that we were going back to stabilize the line where they had withdrawn.
Right.
And so anyway, the next morning, I guess, I think around 11 in the morning when we pulled out of that position, but in that, the first thing in the morning we had bombers dropping bombs and some napalm on the mountain right behind us. And we were getting mortar fire from there before the bombing started. About 11 o'clock in the morning, we loaded up and started out. There was a lot of speculation going on about that time too, that they had been talking for some time, months, about combat pay. And the question was who was going to get combat pay. And they speculated that everyone in front of division rear would get combat pay. Well, I know that units that you never saw before, of ordnance and quartermaster and all that, began sticking up, trying to stay up close to their line. Well, that morning, the road was choked with this big outfits that you never see going by, and we were waiting for that road to clear, and then about 11 o'clock we got out of there, and we didn't get more than 2 miles down the road when they knocked out the lead vehicle in the convoy. And then shot it up. We lost 11 of our 18 howitzers.
Mm-hmm. Now, did most of the men get out, but you just had to leave the equipment behind, or?
Yeah, well, my section and five other howitzers got out on the battalion commander was aware of a I don't know, I guess it was an old road that the engineers had cleared and improved somewhat, that took off from the main road, and we were able to bypass them. So we got out all right, but we walked out over the hills, some of us, and they called in an airstrike, and the Marines and Corsairs, especially them, came in real low, strafing and dropping napalm on the stuff to burn it up. And I remember from the ridge we could see the Chinese jumping on the trucks and throwing equipment off to salvage it, and trying to. Some of it was burning, and they were stomping out the fires and doing what they could to salvage equipment out of it. But I never heard any improved or accurate figure of what the loss was that day, but the only thing I ever heard was that there were 405 dead and missing.
Which is a pretty substantial number for a unit of that size.
Yeah, I thought we had probably around 1,300 men there.
So your part of the artillery battalion got out, but if you're losing that many guns, then a certain rest of it didn't. Now, was this, but that 1,300, does that include the whole Regimental Combat Team at that point, or?
No,
Just the
it was the Field Artillery Battalion and a company of combat engineers and a tank platoon, I guess it was, and a company of infantry was with us too.
Okay. All right. Now, once you kind of get around the ambush, then, do you move into a new line pretty quickly and stay, or do you just keep going?
Well, we got back to the below where they stabilized the line again, and we stayed there for, seemed to me it was about 5 or 6 days, and we got some replacement men and equipment. They had to get howitzers up for the units that had lost theirs.
Okay. And then, do you go back into action at that point?
Right.
Or?
Yeah. Went right back up.
Now, how much understanding did you have of sort of what was going on overall at this point? Was it just all kind of confusing and going by you, and you weren't sure what was happening, or?
I don't know, when I came to understand the understanding of what was happening. We had a good executive officer, Burton, who filled us in with information whenever he had it. I don't know really, how much I had that was assumption on my part, and how much of it was just plain guesswork.
What impression did you have of the Chinese at this point?
Well, just that they had an unlimited number of them. That's really the only thing I could say for them. You know, I don't know about their accuracy as a soldier or anything like that. Although and I don't know that they had the indomitable spirit. I think it was more of being forced to do what they did.
Now, how long did you stay then with that unit in Korea? Were you there through the war, or did you?
I was there until October. I think it was October 13th of 1951.
Okay.
I was there about 11 months.
All right. And then why did you?
No, excuse me, 12 months.
Okay.
12 months.
And then did you leave because you'd been there 12 months and they rotated you out, or?
Yeah.
Okay. So that.
Yeah, I was there 13 months. Yeah, and but I got there like in the middle of September and left the middle of October, and I drew. I think that would be 13 months, but I think I drew 14 months combat pay because of the half-month deals.
Right. So there was a system in place at this point to rotate out the soldiers.
They had been rotating men out from, I believe, in April, about when it started. And my unit had been in Hawaii before the war. And in fact, there were a lot of Hawaiians in the unit. And all of those guys who were with the unit when it first arrived were, of course, the first ones out of there. And it just, finally reached the point where at first it was people with, they had about 10 months in, I guess, when they got out. By the time it got to me, everybody had 12 to 13 months.
Now, you mentioned the unit had a lot of Hawaiians in it. Now, were these, did that include, say, Chinese Americans or Japanese Americans, or were they? Okay.
Yeah.
And did that make the unit a little bit different from some of the ones around it, or give it any different characteristic, or was it just another Army unit?
I don't think so. They were a great bunch of guys. They had, they certainly were, they were good. The only different thing was the care packages they got from home. I remember getting, one of the guys getting little dried shrimp. Eating them like popcorn, and abalone, little wee ones like this.
Okay. Now, by the time you rotated out, were you ready to go home, or did you think you ought to be staying through the war, or how did you feel?
When I came time for me to rotate, I went back by truck, got on an airplane and flew to Japan. Spent, I think, about 5 days there. Then they loaded us on a ship and we stopped one day in Hawaii, but it took us 21 days to go by ship. It was terrible.
All right. Was the weather bad during that trip, or was it just long?
It was bad to begin with. It lasted about 3 days. In fact, we got a new issue of equipment in Japan, and I remember as soon as they got out on the ship, everybody started throwing away these old wool overcoats. And I kept mine just because it was part of the equipment I was given, and so I just kept it. It didn't bother me that much. We got out there, and they had the tail end of a typhoon, and so many people were sick. It was a mess below deck. And after 3 days of it, things began to calm a little bit, and I went up a ladder out of the rear of the boat, and when I stepped out on the deck, it was dark, and close the door behind me, and then I got out a little bit, and I saw the light when somebody opened the door and came out, and the next thing I started getting this bang, bang, bang. Somebody was throwing up into the wind, and it was plastering all over the back of my coat. So I threw my overcoat overboard also.
All right. Now, at this point, you still have time left on your enlistment. You're leaving Korea, but you're still in the Army.
Yeah.
All right. So what do you do then once you get back to the States?
They sent us directly to Fort Custer. I mean, the people from Michigan, of course. And I went on leave from there. And it was November. And so my leave would have ended a couple of days before Christmas. But then they gave me an extension to about the 5th of January. And then I went back to Fort Custer. And while I was on leave up at the Sioux, I attended a party with a anti-aircraft unit that was assigned there. And the captain and executive officers tried to encourage me to join their outfit. They had a little bit different MOS than I did, but there was no reason why I couldn't fill in there. So when I went back to, the other thing was they said that the Department of the Army wanted, because you'd been away from home, they wanted to put you in your own Army area, so you'd be relatively close to home. So when I went back to Custer, I took a letter from them, asked for a transfer to that unit, and of course they paid no attention to it, and they sent me to Fort Lewis, Washington. I was, I guess the reason for that was we were training people out of basic training with field artillery training, and they had 4.5 guns with tractors. The 4.5 gun is a obsolete weapon, but it was obsolete from, I think, just before World War II, and but they had a lot of ammunition in store, so they used it. It shoots the same way as a 155 or a 105, but actually it's separate loading like a 155. So anyway, the unit there went to the field one night of every week, and for a 4-night thing every month. And I wanted away from there. It was terrible. Be out in that rain all the time. The battalion commander said no one's leaving this outfit until after the maneuvers at Yakima in the spring. And so I had, the only way you could get out of there, in fact, was to go to recruiting service or instructor for ROTC and National Guard, or go back to Korea. And so I put in for ROTC instructor, and a friend of mine put in for National Guard. So naturally I got the National Guard and he got the ROTC at the University of San Francisco. Anyway, I then was transferred down to Alameda, California, and was a sergeant instructor there for a field artillery battalion. And a little over a year I spent there, and then was discharged at the end of my 3 years.
All right. And then from there, once you were done, did you have any interest in reenlisting, or did you figure, well, I just went back because there was a war on? And
no, I had intended to stay in when I went back in, but nothing ever went right. In Korea, I got all my papers and filled out everything to go to. They were going to start an OCS over there because they needed officers, and I filled out all my stuff, and the unit was carrying it around. I went up and asked them, you know, what. They said, well, there's 2 other people. We're going to wait on them, and we were ambushed there on the road and lost it all. So then anyway, they asked me to put in again, and I said, no, I give up.
All right. Then you once you come out, then what kind of work did you go into? Or did you go to college? Or
For 2 years, I worked with the National Guard full-time. And at the same time, I took the examinations for California Highway Patrol and San Leandro Police Department and the Sheriff's Department, Alameda County Sheriff's Department. And I took 2 years before I finally was hired by the Sheriff's Department. They just were hiring so few people there. I think I was number 14 on the list, and out of some 130 or something on the list. But anyway, then I went to work for the Sheriff's Department, and I stayed there and retired from the Sheriff's Department.
all right. Well, I think we are about out of tape and getting my cue here, so I just want to close by thanking you for coming in and taking the time to talk to me today.
Okay, you're welcome.
I never seen such desolation. I think we drove for a mile and there wasn't a building hardly standing.
Nobody knew what was going on. They called the situation fluid, but fluid means that nobody knew anything.
It was different. If I had done something else, I don't know what I would have done.